In these videos, we're going to take a look at taking apart and putting back together a magazine from an MPS station. We've got one camera in front of me, and I have another one here, so hopefully we should be able to see exactly what's going on. We're going to start by taking apart this module. To do that, we're going to need a set of Allen keys, a set of precision screwdrivers, a socket if we want to remove the screw from the front of the magazine, and also a pair of Nipex. The Nipex are for cutting the cable ties. I've already removed the cable ties before we start, so we're going to start simply by removing the wires. So, the first thing to do is to unwire the mini I/O. On the mini I/O, we have little terminal clamps, and in order to get the wire out, all we have to do is push the terminal down and pull the wire out. There shouldn't be any resistance when you do this. We're going to go through and remove all of my input wires one by one and my output wire. Because I'm taking it apart, at this point it doesn't matter which wire is which. We'll have to worry about that later when we put it back together again. So I'm going to remove all of the power cables and work my way down to the ground cables. There we go. Now all of the wires are out. I'm now going to start to unscrew the connectors. So I've got a connector here for the optical sensor. That can come off. I've got a cable here connected to the valve. That can come off. It simply squeezes to come off. The other wires are mounted on the cylinder. But now I'm going to leave those on. So we'll just put them to one side. I'm going to remove the pneumatic pipes that run from the valve to the cylinder. So I'm going to remove the black one first. The black one goes to the back of the cylinder, and the blue one, which goes to the front of the cylinder. The next thing to worry about is these optical cables. There are two of them, and they run into the sensor on the back. So what we need to do is we need to use a precision screwdriver in order to loosen that screw. It's really important to do this before you pull the optical cables out. All you need to do is turn the small black screw, and then you should be able to pull these out without too much resistance. If there's resistance, you need to unscrew a little bit further because we don't want to end up damaging the end of these optical cables. We're going to leave the optical cables in the magazine, but at this point I can take that section out. We're now going to want to start to unbolt the sensors, the mini I/O, and also the valve. So to do that, I'm going to take my Allen key. I believe it will be both these two. So we are using here a 3 and also a 2.5. We'll start with the 3, which I think is going to be required for the sensor. So just here we have 2 screws on the inside for this optical sensor, and I'm going to start to unscrew them. Now, as I unscrew those, there are trap nuts which are in the back of the sensor, and I don't really want those to fall out. So I'm just going to take one finger, place it on the back of the sensor while I unscrew this, just to make sure I don't lose that trap nut. And for now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to screw these bolts back in to the sensor so that we don't forget where they came from. Next, we're going to work on the valve itself. So this valve takes the 2.5, and we can begin to unscrew these 2 connectors. The metal plate actually has a thread on it, so this is quite useful because it means there are no nuts on these particular screws, bolts. So the valve comes off, and then we have the 2 that come with it. Again, in order to retain these and make sure we don't mix them up, I'm simply going to screw them back into the metal plate, and that makes sure I won't get them mixed up with the other bolts later when I come to put it back together. I'm going to do exactly the same thing for the mini I/O, so we should be using the 2.5 again, and again the plate is threaded. So I'm simply going to remove these bolts, one followed by the next. Ooh, this is coming out a little bit stiff, so perhaps the person before me was a bit heavy-handed. And again, to avoid losing these, I'm going to just lightly screw them back in, including their washers, into the threaded holes. That'll mean that there's no chance of getting them mixed up with the other ones. So let's just see if we can get this one back in. There we go. So we've kept those bolts safe. The next thing that I'm going to try to do is actually to remove the entire plastic section of this magazine. So to do that, I'm going to start by pulling the cylinder forwards, and that will allow me to insert my Allen key down to release the ones that are inside. So this is a 4mm hex key. We're dropping it down inside the magazine, so it's going through that hole and down into the nut below. Underneath, there is a small nut, which I'm going to have to try to hold while I unscrew these. If I can't hold them, then I'm going to need to use my socket driver to capture that. So let's see if I can do it now. So I'm using my socket driver to capture the nut underneath. And then there we go. Now it comes off a lot easier. So just to show you, we had underneath a single washer and a nut. So I was capturing that nut using the socket driver. I'm going to do the same with the second one. We'll see if it comes out any easier or if I have to get the socket driver out again. Okay, so I'm using the slightly bigger socket driver now, and with this locked in the right place, I can quite easily undo. There we go. So, I have managed to get the bolt and the washer out. Okay, so now I've managed to separate the sheet metal component from the magazine component. If we wanted to, we could tear down this magazine further. We could do that by using the socket driver to unscrew this front section from the cylinder, and that would allow us to remove this plastic component. We could also use a flathead screwdriver in order to remove the small sensors, but this is as far as we're going to take down this magazine at this point. It's also possible to remove the optical cables from the front if you'd like. Again, there is a nut inside. For the purpose of this demonstration, we won't take it down any further than this, and we'll start the reassembly process.